Number 9. Jason and Rochelle Wiese. Shelley Luff was working as a cashier at Bethany College in West Virginia when she began embezzling large amounts of money from her employer to pay off a couple who were essentially threatening to ruin her life. The demands for cash came from Jason Wiese, who Luff had exchanged intimate photos and text messages with, and his wife Rochelle, who threatened to send the contents to Luff's husband if she didn't continue to pay them. They also threatened to physically harm Luff and to tell her employer about all the money she was stealing. Luff's superiors eventually caught on to her theft, which totaled around $1,038,000. She lost her job and was charged for her crimes, but the Wieses took no mercy on her when she was no longer able to pay them, at which point Jason Wiese threatened to burn her house down. The one upside to getting caught was that Luff had nothing to lose by telling the authorities about how Jason and Rochelle were extorting her. A federal investigation found that the Wieses had used their ill-gotten funds to buy 2 vehicles, including a Chevy Camaro and an SUV, along with large amounts of prescription drugs. Jason was convicted of extortion and money laundering and was sentenced to 5 years in prison. Rochelle pleaded guilty to extortion and received a 2-year sentence. The couple is responsible for paying back the entire amount of money that Luff embezzled from Bethany College. Number 8. Brianna Dean. In 2019, 24-year-old Brianna Dean of Port Richey, Florida, was accused of taking revenge porn to a whole new diabolical level. She allegedly stole her ex-boyfriend's phone, used it to access his social media accounts, and used those accounts to post and send photos of his privates. According to court documents, she changed his passwords so that he could no longer access them and demanded payment in order to take the photos down. Police charged Dean with extortion, but she adamantly maintained her innocence in an interview with the Oxygen Network. She did admit that her ex had given her a phone to use as a replacement when hers broke, but claimed that she never used it to post his intimate photos, stating, "It's the stupidest thing in the world." While law enforcement declined to identify the man listed as the victim in the extortion complaint, Dean mentioned that her ex was charged the same day for breaking into her house. She confirmed his name during the interviews. Records showed that the man was charged with felony burglary, along with misdemeanor trespassing, domestic violence, and loitering and prowling. Dean described waking up to see her ex standing over her bed and staring straight down at her. She accused him of climbing through a window while she was asleep and said that he pushed her into a wall. But it's hard to know who to believe in a classic he said, she said case, especially since neither party was a stranger to the law. Number 7. The disappearance of John Patterson. American diplomat John Patterson vanished one morning in 1974, just 2 months after he started working at the U.S. consulate in Hermosillo, Mexico. Several hours later, a note in his handwriting appeared at the consulate. He stated that a group called the People's Liberation Army of Mexico had abducted him and demanded a $500,000 ransom along with a news blackout. The note threatened that if word of Patterson's kidnapping was leaked to the public, the group would murder one U.S. official or a member of their family every week. Patterson was the 7th U.S. diplomat to be abducted in a little over a year's time. Then President Ronald Reagan was determined not to cave to the mounting demands for money in exchange for the return of consular staff. He created a new law making it illegal to negotiate with or concede to terrorists' demands, which meant that American officials had no plans to pay Patterson's captors. His wife, Andra, did everything in her power to try getting him back. When she couldn't stop the news from reporting on his kidnapping, she publicly apologized to the gang. She published newspaper ads pleading with the captors to contact her and offering the highest ransom she could afford. At one point, someone with a suspiciously American accent called the consulate and said to have Andra travel to a hotel to deliver the payment. She stayed there for 7 days, but nobody came to collect the money. Some people believed that the kidnapping was a hoax for this and other reasons, including the fact that nobody had ever heard of the People's Liberation Army of Mexico until Patterson vanished. The FBI eventually zeroed in on a suspect named Bobby Joe Kesey, who was staying at a hotel near the consulate when Patterson disappeared. Kesey admitted to writing at least one ransom letter but maintained his innocence otherwise. He took a plea deal and spent 11 years in prison for conspiracy to kidnap. 4 months after Patterson went missing, a peasant discovered his decomposed body in the desert 345 miles north of Hermosillo. His skull and back bore signs of repeated violent blows. The circumstances surrounding his disappearance remain a mystery to this day. At number 6, Robert Dyer. In 2000, Tesco supermarkets in southern England began receiving letters from someone calling themselves Sally. The letters demanded that the stores provide the person with Shoppers Club cards that were modified to make unlimited ATM withdrawals. The Bournemouth Daily Echo newspaper and Dorset police also received similar letters. A few months later, Sally began sending bombs to random households. One of the packages was received by an elderly couple who were both injured in the explosion. Several of the parcels were intercepted by the Postal Service for not having enough postage on them, and thankfully never ended up on anyone's doorstep. Sally soon began threatening to send pipe bombs. Alarmed by the violence that had already occurred, Tesco began producing the modified shoppers cards. When the store was unable to meet Sally's deadline for making a certain number of cards, the anonymous terrorist claimed to have mailed out a pipe bomb. Luckily, no trace of one ever appeared. Police traced several of the threatening letters to a specific post box and conducted surveillance. They identified Sally as Robert Edward Dyer and visited his home, where they saw one of the extortion notes on his computer screen. Dyer was convicted of assault and 9 counts of blackmail and received a 16-year prison sentence that was later reduced to 12 years. Number 5, Helg Skarby. Helg Skarby wasn't known for his good looks, yet he had the uncanny ability to woo women like a modern-day Casanova, earning himself the nickname the Swiss Gigolo. He was so good at it that he managed to seduce some of the world's wealthiest women, including BMW heiress Suzanne Clatton. But underneath all of the charm and smooth talk, Skarby was nothing more than a con man. He manipulated women into giving him money, then blackmailed them into giving him more. His affair with Clatton started in 2007, when they were both in their 40s. He dazzled her with tales about his adventurous career as a high-ranking government representative who was deployed specifically to crisis zones. This wasn't true, and neither was the story he told Clatton and 2 other rich women before her about how he had accidentally killed a mafia boss's daughter in a car accident and needed to pay a multi-million-dollar bribe to avoid being murdered. Like the other victims, Clatton believed Skarby, and within months of meeting, she forked over the 7 million euros in cash that he claimed the mafia was demanding. Naturally, this opened the door to more financial requests from Skarby, but when Clatton wised up and refused to give him any more money, he threatened to blackmail her with a video he had secretly filmed of them being intimate. Clatton set aside any fear she had about how the situation might affect her personal life and went to the authorities, who charged Skarby with fraud. He pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 6 years in prison. Number 4, Ted and Mary Roberts. In 2001, a married Texas attorney named Mary Roberts began cheating on her husband, Ted. She had affairs with men from her past and whom she met through an adult website where she posted ads seeking casual encounters. Ted, who was also a lawyer, eventually discovered that his wife had slept with 5 married men. The couple decided to stay together, but Ted needed his own version of closure over Mary's infidelity. He learned everything he could about her affairs and sent each man a legal petition outlining what he knew. The wording strongly implied that if the matter wasn't settled out of court, Ted would file the petition and its details would become public. The recipients were given the option of avoiding court by negotiating a compensation amount for alleged damages resulting from their involvement with Mary. Terrified by the thought of their marriages being ruined, 4 of the men ponied up. They were told the money would go to charity, but it went into the couple's personal accounts and wound up putting a portion of the down payment on a new home. The Roberts' shady dealings were exposed after a fallout with Ted's business partner who kept copies of the petition. The San Antonio Express News got word of the story and published an expose which caught the attention of prosecutors. Both Ted and Mary were ultimately convicted of several fraud and extortion-related charges. Ted received a 5-year prison sentence, while Mary received 10 years of probation, and they both lost their license to practice law. Number 3. Lorenz, Johanns, Grisel, Landau. While stationed in Germany during his service with the U.S. military in 1959, Elvis Presley saw an ad for the services of a skin specialist named Lorenz Johanns Grisel Landau and decided to hire him. Things went fine for the first month of Elvis's facial treatments. Some people thought he was being scammed, but he believed that he saw an improvement in his skin. Grisel Landau eventually began making unwanted physical advances towards Elvis's friends and, according to some sources, towards the king himself. Elvis fired Grisel Landau, who then claimed to have potentially career-ruining photos and audio recordings of the singer in compromising situations. He threatened to leak the material to the public if Elvis didn't pay him. Elvis tried to squash the situation by offering to pay Grisel Landau $200 and cover a plane ticket to London. The skin specialist agreed, but instead of catching his flight, he demanded $250 more, which Elvis paid. Grisel Landau then made one final demand for a large sum of money to cover the loss of his business, which he blamed on the singer. Nobody knows exactly how the situation ended or what happened to Grisel Landau. He boarded a flight to Germany, and no further problems were reported. Number 2. Robert Neil Hassan. Robert Neil Hassan was a private investigator from Bellevue, Washington, who made himself seem more connected with the government than he really was. During the late 1980s, he convinced elderly couple Vern and Eleanor Jeans that their son-in-law owed a drug lord $100,000 and that their daughter's life was in danger. The news was both shocking and confusing to the couple, who never knew their daughter or son-in-law to be drug users. But because Hassan had convinced Vern and Eleanor that he was a high-ranking DEA official with ties to the CIA and access to highly confidential information, they believed him. He told them that their daughter needed round-the-clock protection, which he offered to arrange, and persuaded the senior citizens to fork over $69,000. A DEA agent would later tell the press that Hassan had only worked on 2 cases with the agency and that he was an informant, not an actual employee. He was banned from working as an informant for his bizarre and unprofessional conduct with a suspected criminal. The victims realized they were being scammed when their daughter became suspicious of Hassan and pressed them to tell her about their relationship with him. Hassan was convicted of theft and sentenced to 2 years in prison, which may not sound like much given the nature of his crime, but it was 4 times the recommended maximum in Washington at the time. And at number 1, Matthew Ross White. 42-year-old Donna Steele vanished from her home in Queensland, Australia's remote Cooktown region, in 2017. Her body was found floating face down in a crocodile-infested creek several days later. In 2019, following one of the region's biggest investigations of all time, authorities charged 26-year-old Matthew Ross White with Donna's murder. The prosecution argued, based largely on White's confession, that he was broke and believed Donna was loosely connected to a powerful crime syndicate. He thought he could blackmail her for $20,000. White drove to her home and hid under the bed, waiting for the right time to attack. During questioning, White told police that he ambushed the victim while she was putting away groceries and tried to strangle her with a piece of twine. When that didn't work, he used a scarf. DNA found on a piece of twine near Donna's body was a match to White, further implicating him in the crime. He maintained his innocence until halfway through the trial, when the prosecution played his confession, at which point he changed his plea to guilty. The judge sentenced him to life in prison. Thanks for watching. What would you do if someone was trying to blackmail you? Let us know in the comments below, and remember to subscribe. I'll see you next time. Bye for now.